A friend of mine, whose name is Jonathan, is now almost 50 years old. And he still remembers something that happened to him in 8th grade. Something that had a large impact on his life. His class at school, they were going on a field trip to Quebec. They were in Maine in school, and for many months, he and his 8th grade classmates prepared for this field trip, and he saved his money. He was planning on buying things for his mom and dad, for his brother, and of course, a lot for himself, and he had his dollars all set up in his wallet, ready to go. He packed his bag, and along with all of his classmates, in a bunch of noise and bustle, they got on the bus and started the drive. They stopped at a McDonald's for lunch, and somewhere in the midst of lunch or getting off the bus or getting on the bus, Jonathan lost his wallet and all of his money. He was really embarrassed and really sad. And you know 8th grade boys, they try to hold it together, but sometimes they can't. So he was sitting by a window in the bus, just crying. And one of the girls in his grade, who frankly he had never paid any attention to because she was nerdly and short and really shy, she sat down next to him and asked him what was wrong. He told her, and she held his hand, which was really weird, but nice. When they got to Quebec and stopped the bus, Jonathan's best friend came up to him with a pile of money about this thick. "This is for you," he said. "What do you mean it's for me?" "Well, everybody in the class chipped in $5 each, so you have money now." Jonathan said, "Whose idea was this?" "It was Jill's idea." The short, nerdly girl that he didn't pay any attention to. Jonathan ended up having a wonderful time on the trip, but he never forgot what that girl did for him. It wasn't really that big of a deal, but it made a big impact on his life. One little thing. And he started thinking about how giving money can change people's lives, and today he is a financial advisor for philanthropists. It's very strange how when we let God act through us, even when we do something very small, it can have a huge impact. God's influence upon us is very different from human influences. It seems to grow over time. Now, when Jesus was trying to tell the people of Galilee about God, he struggled to find the right words. How do you talk to people about the eternal one? How can you form language that even makes any sense or does God any justice? I recently went to Italy to do a wedding. I know I have such a terrible job. It was a terrible sacrifice. We had some of the most amazing meals in Italy, and finding the words to describe that food was almost impossible. The taste, the texture, it was beyond words, and that was just a meal. So think about Jesus trying to describe God. He didn't know how to use the right words. So he ended up using these things that we now call parables, little stories or images based on what people already knew. So the people of the Galilee were mostly farmers and fishermen. So Jesus used the images that they knew so well to try and point towards God. He talked about wind and trees and soil and seeds. And one of the most powerful images that Jesus used was the image of a mustard seed. Have any of you seen a real mustard seed? They're really small and light. If you put them on your palm and the wind blows, they'll fly right off. They look like a tiny piece of dirt. They're completely nondescript and so easily lost or missed. And Jesus uses this phrase, the kingdom of God, or the kingdom of heaven. And if you try to translate the words from the ancient Greek, it's very difficult to translate. It could be the realm of God, the presence of God, the impact of God. Why we chose kingdom, it's okay, but there were so many English words to choose from. I think what Jesus was trying to say is how you know God's around, how you know God is acting, how you know God is present. The realm of God, the presence of God, is like a mustard seed? What a strange image. But that tiny seed, if you plant it, it can become this huge shrub, almost a tree-like thing in Israel. And you know, in Israel, there isn't a lot of shade. So that's a big deal to create shade. When God is around, the little thing can become huge. God's influence, God's single touch on something in your life can reverberate throughout your entire life. Before we went to the wedding, JD and I rented a car and we drove up to the town of Assisi, where St. Francis is from. You know, St. Francis lived about 1,000 years ago. Talk about a mustard seed. He was a short, nondescript man who didn't want to do anything except for live like Jesus lived. He gave up all of his belongings. He didn't have a house. He didn't have anything to speak of, no job. And yet this man was so in love with God. He was so full of the presence of God, the kingdom of God, the realm of God, that 1,000 years later, if you go to Assisi, you can feel his presence. I went down into the tomb where his body is laid, and I couldn't stop crying. I had no idea how much this simple town in the beautiful hills of Umbria in Italy would impact my life. And Francis did nothing but make himself smaller and less. And yet he was so full of God that thousands and millions of people flock to Assisi, because in coming to know Francis, they come to know Jesus. And 1,000 years after he lived, we're just beginning to understand some of the things that Francis talked about when he loved the earth so much, when he talked about it as our mother and brother and sister, when he sang to the birds. People thought he was nuts back then. Now we're beginning to understand that we need to treat the earth as our own. Francis would become so absorbed in the love of God that he would see a flower and he would burst into tears because it was so beautiful. Or we would sing to the animals. And only now are we just beginning to understand why he cherished the earth so much and how we need to as well. I think most of us, we want to make an impact in our lives. We want to somehow make a difference. But ironically, I think it's when we make ourselves less and God more that we can really make a difference. You know, the mustard seed parable, I have another image that I love. I call it the ripple effect. When God touches a life, it's like when a pebble is thrown into the water, and you know how the ripples just go out and out and out? Francis's life was so small, but the impact on the world was so great. Jesus' life, we have 3 years documented of Jesus' life. He never wrote anything. He never made a movie. And yet, 2,000 years later, the world is worshiping him. Talk about a mustard seed. Talk about a ripple effect. The potency of God's presence grows with time, whereas the potency of ourselves, it doesn't last. You know, in this day and age, we have so many really important political issues that are facing us as a congregation. Just this week, people were talking, and it broke my heart, about children being separated from their parents at the borders. And people want me to come out on one side or the other of these very heart-wrenching, difficult issues. But I want to tell you what I think God is doing here in our community, because I think it's very special, and it may be actually something that can impact the whole country. At our vestry retreat a couple weekends ago, I was watching as a middle-aged, white, motorcycle-driving, gun-toting, football-loving Republican man was loving on a black, lesbian, progressive woman. And I was thinking, this is what we have here. We have a community of true difference, and not just racial or socioeconomic, although those are important. We actually have Democrats and Republicans worshiping together, listening to one another, honoring and respecting each other, and that, my friends, is powerful. Because church in America has become the most segregated time of the week in all respects. And because Americans now live siloed in their narratives, we live with the television station that we like and agree with the friends that we like and agree with. And it's very uncomfortable for us to interact with people who disagree with us. I was reading a book that said it even takes more brain energy. It's neurologically exhausting to hang out with people who disagree with you. It is easier and more comfortable just to hang out with those who are like you and think like you. What we have here is a true container of difference and love at the core and community. And I think that is truly of God, and it is something that we need to acknowledge and understand and cherish. I do believe that God is touching this community. And how that's going to play out, how that will ripple out into the world, I don't know. But I'm watching, and I'm so excited to be a part of it.